When Karoline Leavitt arrived at a high-profile charity gala in Washington, no one expected that a single chair could spark national outrage. But within minutes, the air of elegance turned to tension, and what began as a subtle snub escalated into a full-blown reckoning. This is the story of how political favoritism collided with personal pride, and how the staff behind the scenes paid the ultimate price. Make sure to like and subscribe, so you do not miss what happened next. The chandeliers shimmered in quiet reverence as the nation's elite gathered beneath the domed ceilings of the Capitol Crescent Hall. It was not just another charity gala. This was a power event, drawing senators, media moguls, and cultural icons into one room for a night that promised grace, influence, and attention. At the center of it all was a roped-off VIP section. Gleaming chairs, gold-embroidered place, cards, and a view that placed its guests in the camera's direct path. Among those expected to sit there was Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative voice with sharp rhetoric and growing political clout. Leavitt arrived precisely on time. Her presence was calculated: tailored black dress, quiet pearl earrings, and a composed smile that hinted at readiness for more than just cocktails. The usher, clipboard in hand, nodded as she was led to her seat, positioned between two former cabinet officials and directly across from the event's keynote speaker. But as she lowered herself into the velvet-backed chair, whispers began trickling. From the side entrances, why were the security teams suddenly shifting in their positions? Why had the event coordinator started pacing behind the curtain, phone pressed tightly to his ear? And why, out of all the VIP guests, was Leavitt the one being approached again? This time with a nervous smile and a quiet, apologetic tone. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, but there's been a change. We're going to need to reassign your seat." Her eyes narrowed. "To where?" "Just a few rows back," the usher replied, not meeting her gaze. "It's protocol. A last-minute arrival." That last-minute arrival entered only seconds later, flanked by staff, flashing smiles, and camera shutters. Michelle Obama. Towering in confidence and aura, she swept into the room as though gravity shifted in her favor. She nodded graciously, as applause erupted, and without hesitation, was escorted to the seat that, only moments earlier, belonged to Karoline Leavitt. The crowd stood, but Leavitt did not. What does it say about a society that claims equality, only to rearrange the rules for its favorites? Was this about security? Was this about politics? Or was it about something much deeper? Who deserves to be seen, and who is quietly pushed aside? Seated now 3 rows behind the front, Leavitt's gaze never broke. She watched the exchange with a tight jaw and calm fire, her hands folded precisely in her lap. But behind her, other eyes were moving too. Staffers, whispering to each other, one of the planners shaking her head slowly, mouthing something to a colleague. The displacement had not gone unnoticed. In a room where everything was orchestrated to perfection, the last-minute seat swap was not only visible, it was explosive, and within minutes, the consequences of that decision began to ripple. Would the public know what truly happened? Could such a blatant gesture go unanswered? And who, behind the curtain, had made the call to remove Karoline Leavitt for Michelle Obama? And why did they now look so nervous? The first domino had fallen. Behind the velvet ropes and gentle music, the illusion of elegance held barely. While the audience's eyes remained fixed on Michelle Obama's graceful entrance, behind the scenes, the staff scrambled to contain the aftermath. Event coordinators, huddled near the catering doors, glancing toward the VIP section as though expecting something to erupt. And it was not long before it did. Karoline Leavitt may have moved quietly, but her silence spoke volumes. Her removal had not gone unnoticed by political allies seated nearby. Senator Martin Holloway, a longtime supporter, leaned toward a communications aide and muttered, "Find out who authorized that." Others simply exchanged knowing looks. In a world where seating was status and status was power, Leavitt's reassignment was not just an oversight, it was a statement. Meanwhile, inside the service corridor, the gala director Evelyn Parr was fielding calls with trembling hands. The decision to reassign Leavitt's seat had been made less than 15 minutes prior, triggered by a sudden directive from the top donors team. Michelle Obama's appearance had not been on the original schedule. It had been a late power play, sealed by a phone call, a promise, and a thinly veiled warning about optics. Evelyn's assistant Cassie pulled her aside. "They're noticing," she whispered. "Some of the attendees are asking why Leavitt was moved. Security said she wasn't flagged. This wasn't a protocol issue." Evelyn exhaled, her face drained of color. "I was told to make the switch. I did not question it. But if this becomes political—" "It already is," Cassie replied, eyes wide. "And the staff is nervous." Tension thickened with each minute. A photographer accidentally captured the moment Michelle took the reassigned seat. Leavitt still visible in the background, expression unreadable, posture unbroken. The image quickly made its way to social media, and within minutes, it caught fire. What message does it send when one woman is quietly erased to make room for another? What conversation was being sparked behind the glowing screens of millions of viewers now watching the controversy unfold online? Was this about race, politics, or just raw, unfiltered power? Back at the event, the charity's president, overwhelmed by calls and texts, requested an emergency meeting in the side hallway. 5 staff members, including Evelyn and Cassie, were summoned. The donor's representative was already there, tall, composed, and firm. "This cannot blow up," he said, coldly. "We need control of the narrative. You were instructed to handle it cleanly. You failed." Evelyn's lips parted in protest, but no words came. Across the hall, Karoline Leavitt remained still. She had not walked out. She had not created a scene. But her message was clear. She was not the one embarrassed tonight. That burden, it seemed, was shifting to those who had pulled the strings. What happens when an orchestrated gesture backfires? When the people behind the curtain are dragged into the spotlight? What happens when control slips and image becomes scandal? The gala had barely started, and already reputations were unraveling. The room glittered with the illusion of normalcy, but underneath the glamour, fault lines were splitting wide open. Word of the seat swap had spread far beyond the velvet-lined ballroom. Political influencers had already begun dissecting the moment. On live streams, bloggers were framing it as a cultural insult, and newsrooms were quietly shifting their attention from the charity's cause to the scandal brewing beneath it. Karoline Leavitt had said nothing publicly. She did not need to. Her removal had become a symbol, and the staff responsible were about to become scapegoats. Inside the event's control room, a frantic scramble was underway. Monitors buzzed with camera feeds, and staffers tapped furiously at laptops, trying to contain the narrative. Evelyn Parr stood in the middle, one hand gripping her earpiece, the other trembling by her side. The donor's representative, who had made the call to prioritize Michelle Obama, now loomed with a detached urgency. "You're going to fix this," he said, voice calm but dangerous. "If this explodes any further, the optics will destroy the entire event." The tension was unbearable. Cassie stood to the side, staring at a trending post that included the now iconic photo of Leavitt in the background, staring straight into the camera as Michelle smiled in her reassigned seat. The caption read, "Erased, but not invisible." Suddenly, security entered. Not uniformed guards, but 2 men in suits, earpieces flashing, escorted by venue management. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into silent dread. The head of operations, a man who had worked these events for over a decade, was quietly pulled aside and handed a printed document. "You're being relieved," one of the men said. "Effective immediately." Relieved? In the middle of the gala? He was not the only one. One by one, staff members were discreetly removed from their posts. First the assistant floor manager, then the communications lead, then two more from the protocol team. Within minutes, Evelyn was handed a sealed envelope and escorted out of the control room. Her face was pale, eyes dry, as she passed Cassie. In the hallway, "They're gutting the team," Cassie whispered to another staffer, her voice barely holding together. "They're firing everyone who touched this." Panic began to ripple through the staff. Was this really about a seat? Or was it about the fear of being associated with the wrong political decision? When image is currency, who ends up paying? The price for public perception? Back in the ballroom, Leavitt finally rose. She spoke to no one. Her calm, deliberate movements caught the attention of the cameras again as she made her way toward the side corridor. Reporters near the exit tried to engage her, but she offered nothing. Only a glance, a pause, and the ghost of a smile that hinted she had known this moment would come. Michelle Obama, seated at the front, seemed unaware, or perhaps unbothered, by the tremors unfolding just a few steps behind her. She was used to rooms tilting in her direction. This one had done so with extra force, but not without consequences. Outside, Leavitt was approached by two prominent donors. They had seen everything. They said nothing about charity or speeches. Instead, they shook her hand and simply said, "You handled that with more grace than the entire institution." Inside, Cassie sat alone in the hallway, still wearing her credentials, her phone buzzing nonstop. The group chat was full of messages from now former staff. No explanation had been offered. No apologies were made. The gala continued, but the foundation beneath it had fractured. Something had shifted, and it would not be buried under candlelight and champagne, because sometimes it is not the person removed from the seat who suffers most. It is the ones who thought they were untouchable. Outside the venue, the cool evening air was laced with tension. A crowd had begun to gather, not just for photos or glimpses of high-profile guests, but because word had spread. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a flashpoint. News vans, pulled to the curb like predators scenting blood. Camera operators hoisted equipment. Microphones went live. Anchors, freshly briefed, began rolling segments not about donations or outreach, but about a political figure removed from a VIP seat, and the cascading collapse that followed. Inside, the ballroom pressed forward in uncomfortable silence. Speakers took the stage, but even their rehearsed charm fell flat. Attendees whispered beneath their breath. Waitstaff moved through the tables like shadows. No one dared mention the firings, but everyone knew. It was in the air. Something had gone wrong, and the cost was being paid in real time. Karoline Leavitt was no longer in the room, but her presence lingered like smoke. Every flash of a camera lens, every vibrating phone, every turned head, it all pointed to the same thing. She had been disrespected, but not defeated. The image of her, calmly dignified amid the swirl of chaos, had become iconic in hours. It was being reposted with captions that struck like daggers. "Grace under fire. They moved her out, but not down. You do not silence strength." The fallout became too loud to ignore. Backstage, a board member from the hosting foundation demanded a crisis meeting. "What happened here," he said, voice sharp, "was not a miscommunication. It was a choice, a political one. And now, the institution is bleeding credibility." Staffers who had escaped the firings stood in the hallway, eavesdropping as the finger-pointing began. The donor's representative, now under scrutiny, doubled down. This was about maximizing visibility. Michelle Obama draws headlines. "We prioritized presence." And in doing so, the board member countered, "You turned a bipartisan event into a battlefield. You think this is about optics? It is about trust." Across the venue, a second crisis brewed. Reports surfaced that a sponsor had quietly pulled out after seeing the video of staff being escorted off-premises mid-event. Another donor released a statement calling for a formal apology to Leavitt. The story was spreading like wildfire, and the narrative was no longer theirs to control. Meanwhile, Leavitt's silence became deafening. She had not released a statement. She had not tweeted a word. But that, in itself, was power. The restraint was a mirror held up to the spectacle. Every attempt to contain the incident only made it grow. Cassie, still one of the few staffers left standing, received a call from a senior aide who had once mentored her. "Get out now," he warned. "They are looking for more heads to roll. They do not care who you are. They care who might leak." In a quiet moment, Cassie walked the corridor where Evelyn had stood just hours before. She passed the service door, the staging areas, the back entrances, all places where the real work of the event had happened. Now, they were silent. The heart of the gala had been gutted, but the shell still glittered. At the end of the hallway, she passed by a monitor showing the live broadcast from inside. A speaker on stage thanked Michelle Obama for her attendance, unaware that outside, viewers were flooding the live chat with a single repeated message: "Where is Karoline Leavitt?" This was not just about a seat anymore. It was about what that seat had come to represent. The invisible calculations of influence, the cost of choosing presence over principle, and the staff who had been sacrificed to protect an illusion that was already crumbling. What happens when the quiet one becomes the loudest voice? When the institution tries to bury its mistake, but only makes it monumental? A reckoning was coming. And no one behind the curtain would escape it. Morning broke not with celebration, but with silence. No triumphant press releases, no cheerful recaps of the event's charitable milestones. The gala had ended, but the storm had only grown overnight. By sunrise, every major outlet was running, with the same headline: VIP chaos, Leavitt ousted, staff purged, donors revolt. Inside the foundation's downtown office, the damage assessment began. What was meant to be a glittering, bipartisan show of unity had become a case study in public relations failure. Staff turnover had turned into resignations. Sponsors were demanding answers. Social media sentiment had turned sharply, with thousands calling for the reinstatement of the fired employees and an apology to Leavitt. But Leavitt still had not spoken. She had not posted, not granted a single interview. The silence was surgical. It was not retreat. It was patience. And that patience was about to erupt. At noon, a press conference was announced. The foundation's remaining leadership gathered, nervously on the steps of their headquarters. Flanked by camera crews and surrounded by murmurs of, "Where's Leavitt?" they stepped forward to issue a prepared apology. "We regret the handling of last night's seating arrangement," the spokesperson said, eyes glazed with stress. "Our intention was never to offend, marginalize, or cause disruption." The words fell flat. A reporter shouted, "Will you rehire the staff you fired?" Another followed, "Has Karoline Leavitt accepted your apology?" They had no answers, and then, without announcement or fanfare, Leavitt appeared. She stepped through the crowd, calmly approaching the microphones. The murmurs swelled. Cameras locked on. Even the foundation's leadership stepped aside, unsure whether to stop her or surrender the moment. She did not wear a designer dress. No makeup crew, no publicist in tow. Just a navy coat, a quiet stare, and the poise of someone who knew exactly what they represented. She began simply. "I was not offended by where I was seated. I was not even surprised when I was asked to move. What shocked me was the aftermath. Good people lost their jobs, not for doing wrong, but for protecting the image of an institution afraid of its own decisions." She paused. The crowd leaned in. This was not about me. It was about a culture that trades integrity for visibility, where someone's presence is elevated not because they earned the seat, but because someone else feared the fallout of denying them. She turned slightly to the foundation board. "Your staff deserved better. And the people who support this cause, who trusted you, deserve better." Applause erupted. Not choreographed, not polite. Genuine. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Hashtags exploded. What began as a night of quiet humiliation had flipped into a public reckoning, and now, a moment of clarity. Within the hour, the foundation announced a complete internal audit. The firings were reversed. Evelyn, Cassie, and the others were invited to return, not as scapegoats, but as consultants for rebuilding the organization's fractured integrity. Donors returned, but this time with conditions: transparency, accountability, no more unchecked optics, no more hidden hands pulling strings behind the velvet rope. Leavitt's speech became a national moment. Cable networks looped it. Pundits across the spectrum called it a masterclass in restraint and strength. Even those who had long dismissed her found themselves acknowledging what could no longer be denied. She had won not just sympathy, but respect. The VIP seat? It became symbolic, not because of who sat in it, but because of who stood tall when it was taken away. And so, what was meant to diminish her ended up defining her. What was designed as a slight became the spark. And those who played politics behind the scenes found themselves no longer in control of the story, because when the curtain falls, the truth stands center stage.